Ladies and gentlemen, we had a very eventful LEC day. Some upsets, some big games, some matches, let's call them that. It's 1 a.m. I'm at home. I'm not doing the LEC this weekend. I'm going to be back on the LEC next weekend. First game, Astralis versus Mad Lions. So this is something that I talked about, right? This is something I talked about in my tier list, that Astralis, the more and more games they play, the more and more predictable they will be. And when Mad Lions do a rotation like Gragas, Xayah 1-2, then, you know, you have to pivot. You have to pivot, and you can no longer play champions that can only fight and go all in. So Gragas, Xayah are the best champions in the game, or some of the best champions in the game, at playing a game where they are trying to be like when the enemy is trying to run you down. And I think that in itself really creates this dynamic where Astralis need to figure out ways to break that, because everyone's going to just move very heavily in that direction. So a big adaptation that we saw in this LEC weekend was the high prio on Rakan, which makes sense, right? It's like Rakan Xayah, like Xayah Rakan just seems to be like the Exodia composition. The answers into Gragas, at least there's some out there, right? And we see less and less Gragas mid lane. It's more of like a jungle pick. So people are willing to give it up. We see the Rakan first pick. Astralis banned Jace, Varus, Annie, and Mad Lions just banned 3 junglers in the shape of Sejuani, Elise, and Jarvan. Which is perfectly fine, right? That's like their approach. They removed Seju, Elise, and Astralis the last time they played on... when these champions were out, they played the Veigar composition to kind of put leader in a position where he can play the melee champs. So Rakan's first pick, the enemy looks Gragas, Xayah, and then the follow-up is Lee and Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa is something that, you know, Xayah used to often is picked into Kai'Sa, right? But it's something that players have been willing to trade in the past. The main thing here is that you're blinding Rakan, and the options that you can pick into Rakan, of course, are plenty. You can play like Nautilus, you can play the ranged supports. Like Mad Lions, if they wanted to, they could even pick like Renata here on 3, and like that would even really cement this idea of them really breaking down the enemy. Mad Lions banned Rise, and the key thing here, right, as I mentioned in my rundown too, is that Mad Lions, they are keeping the flex choice of Gragas until 5 pick, which is super important. They picked the Gnar on 4, and I was very surprised to see the Ignite Gled and then the Akali blind. I like the Rise ban too, because Rise Lee Sin could create advantages in the early game, and Astralis has shown that they've been very good at converting that. The key thing here, I think, is just, you know, in the end, Lee Sin didn't accomplish much. There was a fight around the river. Gragas managed to steal the Drake, and Kled is playing Ignite against Gnar, and he just couldn't find like all-in angles or like situations where Gnar was put in trouble. He TP'd back, and then he has Ninja Tabi on first base, and then like Kled is kind of lights out. It was like this one gank window that they used, and Ignite and Flash was burnt, but Gnar survived, and from that point onward, Gnar was just a stronger champ. So a lot of people were underrating in my chat when I was doing the tier list, underrating Mad Lions, but this is just, you know, Mad Lions showing, you know, a lot of class. I think it was a decent game. I think they played structured, they played well, and I think Astralis' composition left them with very little options. They tried to kill a couple of times aside, but when Astralis, the way they play, I think a thing that they should consider when we are looking at how they're approaching pick and ban, like if they want to really commit heavy into this idea, either they begin to build a roster of counters into the heavy disengage. At the same time, it's like Gragas, Xayah, the key thing about these champions is that they are just so strong in the meta. So it's not like any team is exposing themselves to any weakness when Gragas and Xayah are locked in. And I think that's like the core of the issue. But I think if Astralis want to be in a position where they want to play these heavy engage compositions, I think they should care less about poke champions. It could be matchup related, but they banned Jace and Varus, which I think is perfectly fine if you think about the matchup. But if you think about the champions that the Astralis want to play, they should be interested in inviting this. Chasey is a great Jace, right? So it might be specific to him, and I find that completely fine. But Gragas and Xayah in the meta are just very strong and tough to break. All in all, Astralis, I hope they kind of show different layers to themselves. I think Mad Lions played a decent game, and we can move on to the next one. Team Heretics vs XL. You always can safely assume that a lot of these games, when it comes to the lower end teams, they're going to come down to draft. Team Heretics, they first pick Rakan, as we saw before, and then the Xayah Sejuani 1-2 with the Gragas ban. And he's also out on red side. Draven was also banned, which makes sense because you just want to slam Xayah 1-2. And if the enemy can Rakan Draven, for example, maybe they are competitive. They picked Wukong, something that Jankos has been very effective on. He's been team fighting well, has had strong early games. It definitely continued in this game too. And then Nautilus on 3 into Rakan. As we mentioned before, you can pick many things into Rakan. Just Rakan after the buffs and him being a melee champ and so forth definitely makes him super strong. Has like decent itemization options too. XL ban Azir, Olaf 4-5, which is, the Olaf was a bit surprising, not something that I believe Evi plays, but then again, I'm sure Team Heretics and XL have scrimmed each other over the time of the previous splits, and Olaf is just one of the stronger blinds, especially if you're showing Nautilus Sejuani, so I don't mind it too much, especially if you're planning to ban Case Hunter. Maybe they have something in terms of scrim knowledge that we don't know. Akali Italia ban. And then we have the follow-up, which is just Sion Victor. I like the Sion Victor a lot because I think you can safely assume in games against the weaker teams that everything's just going to come down to a front-to-back game. Sion Victor, Zeri, Rakan, Wukong cements how good you are in, of course, the front-to-back. Here, I was surprised to see the Yone. I think Yone here is just very bad. I don't see why you want to play Yone against Wukong, Rakan, Sion. Like I don't understand at all why you want to play Yone. This is a very hard Yone game. I think being able to play mages like Victor and sometimes Talia, Azir, I think when the enemy picks Xayah AD, this is like the best thing you can do. Because Xayah will struggle really hard to cut the distance, and I think Xayah has a lot of counterplay. Xayah has no counterplay into the likes of Victor. He can trade freely. She needs to be the aggressor. She needs to have engage on her team. So I really like this type of identity, especially when the enemy shows Xayah. This game, in terms of how it played out, I'm trying to remember what happened. Kind of spacing out on what happened. Let me just remind myself real quick. Team Heretics versus XL. Yes, we had the first Drake situation where XL were hitting it, and Yone was just completely cut off from the situation, and Zeri could easily join the fight. That was a big swing in terms of gold. Victor sadly didn't get an assist, but the fact that they managed to get first bloods on Xerxes and managed to also seal the deal around the Drake is a super big deal. They exit the situation, Ruby gets to base and go back into mid. Yeah, honestly, I just remember it being such a draft gap. Like, I don't see how you ever want to outvalue the enemy. It's like Yone needs to overperform so heavily in order for anything to happen. I think we saw a lot of Team Heretics classics where they were getting caught in positions, like either they get caught on side or they get caught in mid while their team is on side, which is very classic Team Heretics. I think they have issues being synced up in the game. I think there was many cases where Evi is just dying on side or his team is dying on mid when he's on side, and this is something that definitely Team Heretics needs to work on. I did like their comp. I know I've been one of those guys that have complained about the fact that they are always, pivoting into this, simple to play composition, but in the end, there are situations where it's just the best thing to pick. So I can't fault them for that. To slam Sion Victor is just the best, right? There's no point in overcomplicating, right? So even though I was happy to see, different sides of them, I think in the end, you also have to recognize the moments in time where it's just good to slam the OPs. Yeah, this game at one point, Sion was just unkillable. Wukong was unkillable. They tried to ignore these champions, but that's literally like impossible. It's like, how on earth are you going to ignore them? this Sion actually does a lot of damage with Sunfire, and it's not something that you can pretend doesn't exist. Okay, but very big win. There could be a situation where we get a 3-way tie, guys. It could be a 3-way tie. We could have a situation where Team Heretics have 1 win, XL have 1 win, and maybe Fnatic beat out Team Heretics in tomorrow's match. That could be interesting. But with how some results are panning out, maybe there's some room for some upsets. We continue on to game number 3, which was Fnatic versus BDS. Yeah, sad as it is, I think Advian made a massive blunder in the lane. His bomb blading got procced and then he got hooked, and if you die 2v2 with Kate Lux level 1, it's like you need to be stacking waves, you need to be harassing on the turret, you need to chip away at the platings, you need to have favorable conditions and never let go. There shouldn't be a circumstance where Vi should be able to set up ganks on you, especially with the changes to wards and so forth, and Advian really fucked up here. Really fucked up. It's hard to think about the game beyond that point, honestly. I think they had good conditions top, like they had some gameplay around top that was good to see, but my god, the bottom situation just put kind of like a real cog in the wheel of everything that Fnatic wanted to do in this game. We had a dive in top. I think Adam didn't need to E in after a very clean W. Later down the line, I think that BDS did a very good job of leveraging their bot side advantage. I think they did a very good job of that. I think that was super nice. I think that in mid-game Fnatic still looked kind of lost, and they were dying around mid, they were giving up objectives, they were dying on side, the one that they played towards, they weren't really paying attention to each other. I don't want to put it all on Advian because I think it's unfair, but dying like that definitely ruins the whole lane phase bottom side. I don't want to make it seem like Fnatic, everyone else in Fnatic played perfect, right? There's no way they did, right? There was plenty of mistakes that even though Oscarin had a fine early game, he did die when it was not necessary. Lee Sin was getting hooked in the jungle. The Vi Blitzcrank comb actually, found a lot of value. I think Advian also burned sums when it wasn't necessary. I think many times there were moments where Blitzcrank just got insane value. Like Labrov looked crazy on his Blitz. He looked crazy on his Blitz. Vi Blitzcrank is an interesting combo because you like Vi ult into Blitz hook and you gain value. It's always these fucking new Blitzcrank, these Vi combos are appearing. Yeah, I think in a lot of cases, I think that Reckless was often very late to fights. I don't know if it comes from the desperation of wanting to farm, but I think there's a point where you have to accept that you're not going to be that useful. I think you need to kind of be in tune with what your team wants to do, right? I don't know if I can blame Reckless for that because in the end we don't have the comms, but often I see, Fnatic are trying to trap, and then it's like Caitlyn is slowed down because she's limping in, because she's taking a camp. Maybe there's like a situation where if they commit wholeheartedly into a play, maybe it can play out better. But at the end of the day, it's hard to say, right? It's hard to say because I think BDS just was snacking on Fnatic on the side lanes over and over again. And I think that Fnatic tried to claw themselves back into the game by trying to make something happen. That, of course, accelerates the situation in the game. I think, there's that argument for, the game is lost. Maybe just throw yourself in there, to try to make something happen. And the bottom line is, right, it's like, it's very hard to be useful with Kate when you're this behind. That's like a fact. It's like there was a point in time where Jinx has finished 3 items and Caitlyn hasn't even finished her second, right? That's a disaster. But, if you are playing your odds, it's like maybe you can increase 5% chance of winning to 6% by just throwing yourself into a situation, and maybe you open up the enemy for making mistakes. But if you throw yourself halfway, then the enemy closing out the game will be so much easier. I think the BDS kind of blundered, you know, when they had Nash. I think they could have ended quicker. They gave the enemy opportunities. They could just siege and hit the tower from a distance, but in the end, what happened? They like dove, and Vi got kicked for no reason. You know, I think BDS definitely can work on how they close out the games, because they can't be giving away chances. You know. But of course, I think after the fight around bottom side, definitely the game was over. Let's continue to Vitality versus SK. I think this game, plain and simple, it was just a photon show. Like, Photon is unbelievable. Photon is fantastic. He actually made the Relevant look pretty bad. It's hard to judge after always when you don't see pro view, right? But damn, Photon. What a damn machine, guys. What a damn machine. There was a wild level 1, which gave Zeri a kind of a longsword start, which of course matters a great deal. There was the SK dive, and Upset played it really good to make it 1-for-1, and they TP down with Cassio, which gave Ari an XP advantage. It didn't lead into anything. I remember as well, you know, it's like at some point, it's like the top lane advantage. It's like Photon, even though he played a fantastic lane game, this guy couldn't stop himself from queuing forward, which was kind of fun to see. I think Vitality did a good job of like controlling the space around the Drakes against Infernal Drake. I think pulling it out towards both sides and Pixel is a very good way of you know, controlling like the little ramp that the enemy can enter through. Photon, bro, sometimes he needs to disable his Q button. Shit was crazy. I think the key thing for me was, you know, in terms of the kill distribution, it was so damn good that Nami, like getting Nami early kills is such a big deal. It's like you can finish mandates ahead of time, and I think in this game it was a very good example of the enemy really needing to press hard on the fight around the third Drake, because the issue, like, that was a window where the enemy didn't finish the legendary items. And I think in terms of how the gold generation was going, SK was not going to be able to finish their 2 core items coming into the 4th Drake. The pacing of this game was incredibly high, and I think SK had the best possible chances to fight around the 3rd Drake. But it was truly like a really big deal that Photon managed to actually steal this dragon. Like, it makes such a big difference for the flow of the game. Because that 4th Drake, when they were walking into that 4th dragon, the difference in power was really something. I have to say though, even though Vitality was in a very winning position, they look kind of stiff. At the same time, SK has been one of those teams that have managed to stall out a lot of losing positions, and they've looked for opportunities in a good manner. But I think Vitality definitely have some things to improve on in terms of their accuracy later on in the game. I think there was cases where they like overchased, and they could have just easily turned around to do Nash, and they are like pressing for more. I think we have to blame Photon for this one. The fact that this game and the conditions that they were, that it turned into kind of like a 50-50 around Elder Dragon, that's not something that makes me like super comfortable. You know, I think there was ways for them to create circumstances where they push the enemy out and force them to act, and then off of that, you know, make them face check and really, you know, leverage the power of Cassio more, you know, because SK actually had a free way of entry, but then they had like a good fight, you know, they were so far ahead that they actually won. I just think that there's like some improvement to be made about Vitality's accuracy later on in the game. But once again, it's all the same. It's like Vitality managed to muscle a very big advantage through the sheer force of their individual skill. And those advantages that they are creating are definitely, you know, something to look out for. You know, they managed to do this 4 games in a row. But then again, SK early game is definitely their biggest weakness. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. In terms of the draft, I'm happy to see Lucian Nami, like considering Draven, Xayah, Caitlyn is out. Vi is first picked, you know, just changing up the prio to Vi because you know the AD carry matchup is going to be Zeri Lucianami. I think it's a good move. I think there's few strong Vi players in Europe, but Bo is definitely one of them, unless he's playing in week 3. It's week 2, so it's still okay. Zeri Wukong gets locked in, and then Lucianami, and then Zeri Lulu gets matched. It's important, you know, that Zeri has, you know, he got first blood in this game, so he started with a longsword, and then Nami gets second blood. On 300 gold, you can't really buy anything super interesting besides Fairy Charm on Nami, so that kind of blows. One thing that I could add about the draft, I didn't really like SK's 4-5. I'm surprised that you look for Ari here instead of, you know, potentially looking for a 5-pick mid, so you can find something that is a little bit more durable against Vi. I was surprised that Vitality didn't pick Talia, they went Casio instead. And then the Gnar on 5, I think if there is a situation to pick GP, like this could be one. This was a pretty decent GP angle potentially. I think playing Gnar into Lucian, Nami, Casio, even Vi when you're mini, like, can be pretty rough. It's like in the conversation Jace versus Gnar, I think a very important detail of that is like how do these champions do against the rest of the champions in the game? Because I've seen this matchup go both ways. Jax, when he buys like Lucidity boots and he has room to like Q, if he doesn't have room to Q and he gets poked away and he's losing HP on every like minion that he takes, you know, this matchup definitely becomes harder. I hate to say it, but it's a bit of a jungle diffy matchup from my personal experience from what I've watched competitively. But then again, you know, I think Photon played fantastically and he definitely had the room to do so. Koi versus G2, very big upset, because I didn't think that G2 drafted poorly. I thought that G2 had something that kind of follows the pattern of what they want to achieve. They had a composition that has a very clear game plan, clear and cut. Rakan and Kaiser should really bleed hard in this lane, and then Mickey should be able to take over the river, and then Vitalia play together. This looked like a very clean entryway for G2 to just kind of snowball the game and leverage what their advantages have been all split long. But they first pick Rakan, the enemy responds with Vi Hammerdinger, and then they just lock in Kaiser together with Lee Sin. This is of course because Zaya's banned. Rakan is something that Trimby has done well with, and this is kind of a fresh approach. You know, Koi allowed themselves to drop 4-5 with their solo laners, and they managed to piece together something that kind of works. I liked it. The enemy team has Vi Hammering Ashe, which of course I didn't think it was realistic at all for Rakan and Kaiser to actually survive. They definitely, you know, survived well. We had Talia on 4 and then Gnar TF. I thought on paper this is gonna be a rough draft for Koi to play. I don't think it's going to be easy for Twisted Fate to actually get value. I thought this was going to be a situation where G2 is going to just snowball the early game and take over completely. But in terms of how it played out, I think that G2 botched. Is that the word? Botched. That's a crazy word. They botched some situations. I think, you know, it was a very big deal. Talia went top and disrupted Shigenda's lane, and Gnar burnt his flash, and Talia sacrificed a lot mid to participate in that, which then led to Larson having a swing timer to then TP back top. So it's like that roam top to get the Gnar flash was probably not the greatest decision. You had the conversion of Jax getting killed, and then Shigenda was just dominating top, like he was completely shitting on him for the rest of the game. It was a super big deal. And then you had the situation on bottom side that you know, I remember like basically the enemy team was trying to gank the Heimerdinger Ashe lane, which is something that is very tricky in the first place. It's Lee Sin because it's very hard to connect, and then Rakan doesn't have a very easy way of CCing. If the enemy wants to flash the Rakan flash, they can do so, especially when Rakan is not 6, right? He doesn't have like the easiest tools to commit. So it was crazy that Koi actually took this 3v2 bottom side when they could have just waited for TF to have ult on, and they could have actually like pressured the summoners after they burnt them, but they decided to go again on the gank, and then the circumstance that kind of appeared and was created was Hans Sama just got a double kill. He just got a double kill, and Larsen was getting pressured out by the Vi, and this was a very, very big swing here for G2. But then the continuation was Hans Sama got TP'd on, TF managed to survive the onslaught of ganks that Yike was pushing on him. And then I think a very big deal was just G2 were trying to throw everything they can to kill the enemy bot, to just find kills, but they ended up overreaching, they ended up throwing their spells not in unison, and they were looking for kills that weren't there. And then the key thing, right, it's like in terms of scaling, it's like you have Ashe ADC, the enemy has Kai'Sa, the enemy team has a Twisted Fate, and Twisted Fate is a very strong scaling champion. I want to make it clear, like, Twisted Fate actually scales pretty fucking well. He really generates a lot of gold due to his passive, very similar to GP and his battles, right, with his Q. It's like Twisted Fate generates extra gold from his passive. He has very strong itemization in terms of, he has the rapid fire cannon, into Lich Bane, Death Cap. You have a lot of strong items that you can complete, and we shouldn't underestimate how well the blue side composition scales. Heimerdinger is something that gets worse with time, in my opinion. His value definitely gets worse with time. Ashe is a champion that doesn't really convert gold leads into massive victories as well. And then, of course, Jax was just fucked by Shigenda and that TF port that occurred because Talia roamed and then TF got a swing timer. But all in all, I think, Shigenda played a fantastic game. He was really, really smurfing it. We had some back and forths, but in the end, I think that the game was pretty straightforward because I don't think that G2 actually had enough firepower to be relevant in the game. This is not a composition that you can be behind or even with when the 20-minute mark hits, because the enemy is just going to outvalue you. And then eventually, Koi just secured Nashor, and from that point on, it was kind of smooth sailing. Koi can just easily siege, they can look for gold cards, and every gold card should lead into a kill or a cleanse, and they can just play around this timer, and all thing is good in Koi land. I think this was a very good look for Koi. Very good look. The fact that they played something like this, and they had cohesion. They managed to put themselves in an advantageous position. They punished mistakes, and then they could close out in a very, very effective manner. I think this was a fantastic look for Koi. In consideration that I rated them 4th worst, I think this is a very, very big step up, and I definitely think that this is, a lot more reminiscent of what we believe Koi has the potential to be. I think Trimby on Rakan, Comp on Kai'Sa, the fact that he, was even for so long is such a big deal, and the fact that Larsen survived so many mid ganks is super big. I think that's fantastic. In regards to how this is going to impact tomorrow's matches, Astralis vs BDS, I think BDS should be favored, considering for what I'm seeing, BDS's red side. I think if you can counterpick mid, you definitely just have an easier time for yourself. I need to see Astralis show us more after these specific bans land on them, the Sejuani and the Lees, and then how they piece together a 4-5 that actually, is cohesive and makes sense, because now the bans are super, super clear, and now it's time for Astralis to show their level of adaptation. And so I'm going to favor BDS there. I think they had a good game today, but still need to clean up those Nashors. The later parts of the game need to be more precise. And Mad versus XL, naturally Mad Lions, I think they are favored. I think that goes without saying. Fnatic versus Team Heretics, an absolute banger, but I think that, I think Jankos is just the edge here. And I think Jack Spectra also had a decent game today, and I think that they show, depth. So I'm leaning Team Heretics here, based on what we saw today. SK versus Koi, this was going to be an absolute banger. I think SK versus Koi, happy that Koi showed a lot of life today. Beat G2 in a convincing fashion. I don't think that was like, wow, G2 is trolling, G2 is drafting bad. No. I think that was like a clear-cut victory, you know? It's like, Yike needs to step up and play better, and Broken Blade definitely is a liability at this point, you know? A clear liability. It's like, I gave BB a pass, you know, because I think there was a lot of fights where he was very significant, and I think that it was hard to judge sometimes how much his team is doing to bail him out of poor wave state stop. But now it's becoming more and more clear to me, and I'm kind of feeling, you know, feeling the community sentiment behind Broken Blade being like a question coming into, of course, you know, deeper parts of competition, especially when you have the likes of like Photon completely demolishing, and now having a bot lane that is not going to fall apart, so he can actually like exude his dominance and wrestle fuck Broken Blade, you know. But I was talking about this because of Koi, and Koi is looking good. I think this is going to be a tough one to predict. We're going to have to see how Koi kind of build out the red side draft, how they're going to approach it, because I don't think they're going to get Rakan. That is going to be, of course, interesting, how they approach it. If they're going to drop solo lanes to 4-5 and pick AD 1-2 and then super on 3, that's something that could happen. I'm leaning towards SK because I would like to see Koi's red side before I judge them further, because I believe the draft is going to be an essential part of them being successful. But then again, I think that Koi definitely leveled up the gameplay coming in today. I was happy with what I saw. Vitality versus G2, the match of the week. I think Vitality is favored. I think Vitality is favored now with everything that we saw. I think they have bigger depth in terms of what they played bot. I think that jungle precision, Bo has been fantastic. Perks versus Caps, maybe Caps can cook something up, but I think that Vitality are resilient enough to not fall for it. Could be one of those circumstances where G2 maybe were preparing extra for Vitality or something like this, but then again, it's like they just made inaccuracies against Koi. They were overreaching when they didn't need to, and they were using their spells in a poor fashion, and they managed to find themselves in positions where they were behind. And I think, plain and simple, Vitality, I think that they will dominate the lane phase, and I think that they will be able to convert that into something significant. I think G2 need to prove themselves again, especially after yesterday's match. I think that Vitality is looking favored here. I think just Photon against BB is a big mismatch, and coming into the weekend, I thought that G2 was favored, but I was very disappointed in the first match that they played against Koi. Very disappointed. So I have to lean towards Vitality, but in the end, you know, I have to say once again that BO1s, things can change very fast. BO1s can tell us a very, very wrong story of what a team is going through, because sometimes you can be the victim of a mistake that creates a circumstance in game that allows you to put you in a position that you can show less. That's the nature of best of ones, and that's the nature of predictions too. But all in all, a very eventful day. I think just, you know, the concerns for Fnatic are growing because they can't get away with like, they don't have room to like lose games because of like small mistakes that the enemy can like snowball off of. And I think it's important that Fnatic kind of put a rope around the sack and limit the amount of matchups that they force themselves to play, because, you know, Fnatic played Caitlyn Lux, they played Zeri Ashe, and they played like Zeri Heimerdinger, and then they played another like Heimerdinger game, right? Saya Heimerdinger. It's like they're spreading themselves a little bit thin, you know? Like what is the identity that the Fnatic bot lane is going to look best with? And that's what I'm curious about. And I think that they need to kind of sharpen one spear, because it seems like they're spreading themselves very thin right now. So we shall see. We shall see. Then in regards to Astralis, still, they need to show us an additional layer because we're peeling this Astralis onion. Show us some layers, But Fnatic is running the risk of going 0-9. Tomorrow's match is a really, really big do-or-die moment. And once again, the rise of Koi is the biggest fear and problem for Excel, Team Heretics, and of course Fnatic, because it means that Koi is not rummaging around in the dirt with them. Koi is resurging, taking win off of G2. Strictly from a standing point of view, is such a big deal. Such a big deal. Really, really big deal. So I think definitely I undervalued Koi coming into this weekend, and the tier list would definitely shift. But the weekend is long. We only saw one day. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me on tomorrow's co-stream. I'm going to be joined by the boys again. We were joined by Nuktak today, Closer. We were joined by Dominate, of course, as per usual. Jizuke, the whole gang was here, and it was a lot of good fun. Jizuke, of course, love me, Jizuke. He was a bit rude to me, but doesn't matter. I know he's joking. I deserve it after I say that Jinx should buy a rapid fire cannon.